not Daniel, Ezekiel. Ezekiel, where he saw the living creature. The fire, the wheel in the middle of the wheel, which is basic power. It's simply more, even today, that's the symbol for atomic power. The wheel in the middle of a wheel. And he saw the four, which is a type of the people of God. And then after we see in chapters 4 and 5, the church in heaven, then in chapter 6, the tribulation starts. And it starts with the 7 seals. These 3 sevens, they're the 7 seals are open. And we went through, though, first seal, and the first 4 are what we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first one is a white horse rider, which is a religious deceit of the end time. And when the disciples asked Jesus what will be the signs of the end, he listed these first 4 things exactly like they're in Revelation. First of all, the white horse rider, which was religious deceit. Jesus said, you deceit. The first thing he said, take heed that no man deceive you. Then the second seal was the red horse rider, which is war. And the second thing Jesus said, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. Then the third seal was famine, and that's also Jesus spoke of that. And then the fourth seal was 4 types of death that would kill 1/3 of the people on earth. And then the 5th seal was, we see the martyred remnant, the people who missed the rapture. They missed the rapture, and they got to heaven by being martyrs. But it says that only their souls were in heaven. Their bodies, of course, were still here on earth because they hadn't had a resurrection yet. And then the 6th seal, we see the breakdown of the governments depicted by mountains falling, which the mountains represent governments in prophecy. And that's where the kingdoms begin to break apart, where this one beast takes over. And then the 7th seal was open. Well, we have a parenthetical statement there. When it gets to the end of the 6th seal, it stops a moment and tells about 144,000 Jews that God sealed. This had nothing to do with a revival. He said he sealed exactly 12,000 out of each one of the 12 tribes. Well, the tribes are all different sizes. The tribe of Judah was a huge tribe. The tribe of Benjamin was a small tribe. In between them was Naphtali, Zebulun, and the rest of it. But he sealed exactly 12,000 out of each tribe. And it doesn't mean they got saved. He said they were sealed. And the same word it was talked about Cain in the Old Testament. God put a seal on him to save his life. And that's what it says here. He put a seal on 12,000 out of each of the 12 tribes. And then in chapter 8, it starts moving on again with a 7th seal. And what the 7th seal did, it simply announced then the 2nd set of judgments, the 7 trumpets. And then we go through the 7 trumpets. I'm not going to, but you're going down through the chapter 9, and it goes on through chapter 9, through 6 of the trumpets. And this brings us to the middle of the tribulation period. It's called a week. Let's put this down here. I'll explain this again. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the tribulation period, it calls it a week. But for you young people in here, you see the word week, the Greek word for week and the Hebrew word for week simply means 7 of anything. I mean, according to the Bible, the word, you've set 7 cars out here and you've got a week of cars. You're going to take 7 of you people and put them up here, you have a week of people. It just simply means anything that there's 7 of. And actually, the word week originally started out being 7 years. But in our calendars, it later only made it 7 days as a week. But in the Bible, in the Greek and Hebrew, the word for week means 7 years, because that's what it started out meaning as far as the calendar was concerned. And so the tribulation week means 7 years. And so when we get down to right here, at the end of the first 3.5 years, that's the 6th trumpet has sounded. It brings us to the middle, and it stops right there. And then the story doesn't pick up again for a while. We see the 6th trumpet, and if you would have a Scofield Bible, It would say right there at chapter 10, parenthetical. It means it carried the story on through the first 3.5 years. We see the 7 seals open and then 6 of the trumpets. Then it stops. And it describes a bunch of the things of the people that are involved. And the story doesn't pick up again then for a while until the 7th trumpet sound. And so that's where comes in the 7 personages. And we're going to take those up next before we can go on with the 7 vials, is the 7 personages. That has to do with the tribulation. And so we'll just, as we go along here, so let's go to 10. Chapter 10. And in chapter 10, you'll notice back in chapter 9, beginning with verse 13, the 6th angel had sounded. That was the 6th trumpet. And on to the end of the chapter, it tells what had happened. We got that last Wednesday. So in chapter 10, then, we have gotten to the 6th trumpet now has sounded. All right, let's read here. And, I think I can do better. I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand, and he set his right hand on the sea, and his left foot on the land. I said hand, foot. He set his right foot on the sea, and his left foot on the land, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. When he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Now when the 7 thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write. But I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up the things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them. So we don't know what the 7 thunders said. That is clear out. It wasn't ever put down. So we don't know. But the angel, verse 5, whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land, raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, and the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be, and here is where they made a real bad translation in the King James. Promote your King James Bible, that there should be time no longer. But it should be delayed. Does your Bible say delayed? There should be delay no longer. And preachers have grabbed hold of that and said that means there won't be time anymore. That's a lot of baloney. We're going to have a 1,000-year millennial reign after that, where we'll still have days, and then when the new earth is set up one day, we're still going to have 12 months in the year just like we do now. We're always going to have time, even in what we call our eternity, because the expression forever and ever means age upon age. And when we get into the new earth one of these days, by the way, we're not going off to heaven and sit on a cloud and play a harp and have wings like angels. Of course, the Bible doesn't say angels have wings in the first place. So that all the idea that angels have wings is a lot of baloney. The Bible doesn't say anything about angels having wings. And but we're always going to have time. We're going to have age upon age following age. And what he said, what he meant there should be delay no longer, meant that we were out here to this point, and now in the next 1, 2, 3, well, I didn't put enough deals out here. Now, the next 3.5 years, God is going to completely wind up. It's time now to wind it up. Delay shall be no longer. That beginning at this point now, God is going to wipe out all world powers. And with the battle, and it'll wind up with the Battle of Armageddon when the millennial reign. And so that's what the deal is. And as I was reading, it said in verse 7, but in the days of the sounding of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound, and we're seeing the 6 have already sounded, but the 7th is about to sound. It says that the mystery of God would be finished. That is, he would bring an end to Gentile powers to set up the millennial reign. And So we move along here. And we're going to skip a little bit right here. I don't want to go all the way through. Chapter 11 then. I'm going to try to. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God. Because see, the temple has been rebuilt in Jerusalem. The temple of God, the altar and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles. And we read about that in Daniel, that in the middle of the week, when he invades the country, he's going into the temple and declare that he is God. And they shall tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. So we're at the middle of the sea. And he said, what he's saying now, for the next 3.5 years, the holy city is going to be trodden underfoot. Because up until this time, the Jews have been under a covenant with the beast. And they've been pretty well escaping things up to this point. But now he has invaded the land. And we're going to see that. If you want to see where that happens, it might be a good place to go back to that now. You can go back to Daniel 9. Daniel 9. Let me see. I believe that's where it's going to be. Yeah, Daniel 9:27. Now this is where the Bible meant rightly dividing the word of truth. The word rightly dividing means to lay alongside straight. And it means on any subject. Before you can draw the full picture, you've got to get every scripture on that subject and lay them alongside each other. Go back down in Daniel 9 and verse 27. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment. Now when Daniel wrote this, they were in Babylonian captivity. And he said, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That means weeks of years. 7 weeks would be 49 years. And from the time that the commandment went forth for the Jews to go back from Babylon and rebuild the city was 49 years. And then from that point until Jesus died on Calvary was 7 times 62, whatever, 400 so many years. And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, and not for himself. That's the crucifixion. And the people of the prince who is to come, that's the beast of the end time, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So it was the Roman Empire that destroyed the city. So we know that the beast to come will have to be out of what was the Roman Empire. That's where we get that. And then in verse 27, that when this beast comes in the end time, then he shall confirm a covenant with many, that with the Jewish nation for 1 week, 7-year period. But in the middle of the week, right here, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And so and then we can go to Zechariah 14, and read about it there. And verse 2, for I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. That's where he gets them together in the vale of Armageddon for the great battle. The city shall be taken. That's right at this point. The houses rifled, the women ravished, and the city, half of the city shall go into captivity. But the remnant, the other half, shall not be cut off from the city. And then will I go forth, that's the battle of Armageddon, and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And I'll go with 2 Thessalonians in the New Testament. And that's the only 3 I'm going to read about this, because if we went into all of these, it would take the rest of the year, which would be all right, I guess, but right now I'm just wanting to show Revelation, the framework of it. But In Revelation, 2 Thessalonians, chapter 2, verse 3. And by the way, if anybody tells you, I used to hear it say, oh, the coming of the Lord may not be for 100 years yet. Paul was even looking for the Lord to come in his day. That's a lie. Paul wasn't doing such a thing. Paul was not looking for it. In fact, Paul said right here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, that's the rapture, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled. He said, don't get the idea that Jesus is about to come. In spirit, that is in your, or by word, if somebody gets up in the pulpit and preaches it, forget it. Or by letter, as if from us. In other words, somebody writing letters and signing Paul's name to it, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means. Paul is very plainly saying right here, if you get a letter with my name signed to it, saying that Jesus is about to come, or somebody gets in your pulpit and preaches Jesus is about to come, forget it. It's not about to happen. So Paul wasn't looking for Jesus in his day, not at all. He knew that the coming of the Lord was it's a future time. He said, for that day, verse 3, will not come unless the falling away comes first. And that's where we're living right now today. And the man of sin, that's the beast of the end time, is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So what's going to happen? The beast of the end time will come out of what was one time the Roman nation. And we're going to get a little bit more into that a little bit when he has the 10 horns and 7 heads. 10 heads and whatever, and how we get to it in a while. The beast of the end time will come out of a country that once was part of the Roman Empire. And he's going to start out by making a compact with the Jews for 7 years a week. And so for the first 3.5 years, they'll be pretty well, they'll be in a covenant. They'll be having their temple worship. But in the middle of that period, he's going to break his covenant. He's going to invade Israel. Jerusalem is going to be ransacked. Half the people put into slavery. Said the women assaulted, the houses rifled. And he's going into the temple and telling the world he is God. And from that point on, is what Jesus called the time of Jacob's trouble. From this point, this whole period is called the tribulation, but from the middle on it's called the great tribulation. For it's from this point where he sets in to destroy all the Jews off the face of the earth. So it was back in here, in this first part, that God had sealed 144,000 Jews. And we're going to see at this point, they're in heaven before this actual thing gets started. And and that's what it says, 42 months, chapter 11, verse 2, that they shall tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. It's going to be another 3.5 years. And then here comes the two witnesses. And we're going to the personages we have in those days. But right now, let's look at the two witnesses. I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. So we've got it in two places. One time it was in months, and one time it was in days. We're at the middle of the week. He said, from now on, the temple's going to be trodden underfoot for 3.5 years. And he said, I'm putting two witnesses here, and they're going to prophesy for 3.5 years. And so we know we're at the middle of the week. And these are the two olive trees. We read about that way back in Zechariah. In fact, we're told about the olive trees in Zechariah. That's where we get our great, in the assemblies of God, our motto, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm him, he must be killed in this manner. Now, these have power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy. That means the last 3.5 years there won't be any rain. And so some people feel like that one of the witnesses is Elijah, because that's what he did. It wouldn't rain, you know. And so that's the reason some of them feel that one of them would be Elijah, because he did the same thing that Elijah did. I don't know. Nobody knows who the two witnesses are. Some people feel like that one of them will be John the Baptist, because some of the things Jesus said about John the Baptist. Some people think the other one will be Moses. It'll be Moses and Elijah. Your guess is as good as mine. But frankly, if you want to know what I do think it will be Moses or maybe Elijah and John the Baptist. I kindly have the feeling that it'll be Elijah from the Old Testament and John the Baptist from the New Testament. But that's just my thing. I can't prove it with the Bible, so don't anybody go off and say I preach that. Huh? But anyhow, there's going to be two witnesses, and they're going to be here for 3.5 years. And then, in verse 7, when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom. That's Jerusalem. It's spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. That's Jerusalem. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days. That can be worldwide television. That could be CNN. They're going to leave their bodies right there on the street. And they're going to see their dead bodies 3.5 days. And not one day for every one of the 3.5 years. Their bodies are going to lay there for 3.5 days. And then it says, those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry and send gifts to one another, because those two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. For one thing, it hadn't rained for the whole 3.5 years they've been prophesying. Now, does this sound like any big revivals going on during the tribulation? Let me say this again. These preachers on TV that are preaching that we're going to have one of the world's greatest revivals during the tribulation are absolutely lying. So you see, actually, the name Lucifer is a beautiful name. And Lucifer was God's own personal valet. You've seen pictures of these oriental potentates sitting on the throne, and this guy standing behind him holding a big fan out over him. Well, that's what Lucifer, he said he was the overshadowing cherub. He was God's personal valet. God said, it says in Ezekiel, he was the most beautiful creature that God ever created. It said he was literally the beginning of beauty. And it also said that he was the most intelligent creature that God ever created. The most intelligent creature next to God. And it also said he invented music. All music, when he was still Lucifer, came from him. And he was the most beautiful, the most intelligent of all of God. And that's the reason he got proud and said, well, I'm going to be God. He said, I will be God. And that's when he was thrown out of heaven, and it said a third of the stars went with him. So that's the reason I think he was one of the 3 archangels. And Gabriel has always been God's messenger. And apparently he has a third of the angels under him. It was Gabriel who came to Mary. It was Gabriel who came to Daniel. Gabriel is God's messenger. Michael has always been the one, and his angels who takes care of God's people. Michael was the one who took care of the Jews. Michael is the one who takes care of us now. And it's a third of the angels under Michael that each one of us has our own guardian angel, the Bible tells. We've each one got our own guardian angel. And we know that because he said, you be careful how you offend one of these little ones. It means one of these little children, or it means a new convert. That you don't offend their angel, because it says their angel does behold the face of God all the time. And I've got a guardian angel who's personally my own guardian angel who is in contact with God 24 hours a day. And the Bible says you be careful about offending God's people, that you don't offend his guardian angel. And so these were but Lucifer fell when he fell, then he became Satan, or the devil. And that's what the whole deal is about. Now we have a picture of that, him falling from heaven and a third of the stars. But now, in verse 4, back in Revelation 12 now, and the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to deliver her child as soon as it was born. And that's the third personage we have here, the man-child, which is Christ. It's Christ. And because in verse 5, that tells that. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That's Christ, of course. He's going to rule the whole world during the millennial reign from Jerusalem. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. That was its ascension from the Mount of Olives that day. And then, now this is not all going in sequence. Then the woman fled into the wilderness. Now this is going to happen during this 3.5 years. In other words, he's saying, I saw the picture. Here was the nation Israel. And she gave birth to Christ, who's to rule the nations. Well, of course, the devil wanted to destroy him if he could. But he was caught up to heaven. So now he sees that woman. Since Satan can't get his hands on Christ, he's going to try to destroy the woman. And that's what's going to happen during the next 3.5 years. He's going to try to destroy the woman. And she bore a male child, and her child was caught up. And then in verse 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. Now here is a very interesting thing. See, there's going to be such a severe, the 144,000 that were sealed, we're going to see in a minute, have already been taken up to heaven. But the rest of the Jewish nation is left here, and Satan is going to try to destroy every living one of them, just like Hitler wanted to do. But so God said, prepared a place where they could flee and try to hide themselves. Now, there's been a lot of where that place is. But there's a very interesting thing, a sidelight of history. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 11. This is where you rightly divide the word of truth. In Daniel chapter 11, it talks about the beast of the end time who's going to rule the world. But in the very end of chapter 11, let's go to verse 41. It's been telling about him all through verse 41, Daniel 11:41. He shall also enter the glorious land. That's what he's just doing right here now, in the middle of the tribulation period. And that's when he's going into the temple and to claim he's God. And many countries shall be overthrown. In fact, the whole world is going to be under his dominion. But now, it does not anywhere say in the Bible that the political ruler of the end time is going to conquer the nations by war. It only talks about him conquering 3 countries, is all. That's where you get the 7 heads and 10 horns we're going to see about that. It only conquers 3 countries. The world is under his power through an organization like the United Nations. They're pledged to him in an amalgam, in a unity like the United Nations. But he said in verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Now this is a very interesting thing. Let's draw a little map here of Palestine. Here it comes around the Mediterranean Sea. This is the coast of Turkey and comes down around here. And right there is a mount where Elijah called fire down Carmel, Mount Carmel. Come on down around here. Then here's the Nile River coming out of Egypt. Right along about here is the Sea of Galilee. It's in a triangle. In fact, that's saved my life one night. I wrote about it, and it was printed in the Herald and the Pentecostal Evangel several years ago. Coming in from the east, and we got lost in a terrible storm. And come on down here, and here is the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is right about here. Bethlehem is right there. Samaria is right about here. Here's the Kishon River, and the valley along there is the Valley of Armageddon. And up here is Mount Hermon and so forth, the river coming down out of there. And when I was stationed at that time at Payne Field right down here at Cairo, Egypt. And we were supposed to come in over Amman, Jordan is right about here. We were supposed to overfly Amman. Then we were supposed to, I've got to put these down a little farther south here. We were supposed to slant down and we were supposed to fly right across, right where the Jordan comes into the Red Sea. Then we were supposed to fly between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. They're only 7 miles apart. And then here's Gaza. You hear so much about how to overfly Gaza. Then we had to cross the Suez Canal is right along here. And we had to cross it to the little town of Ismailia. And we had to stay in that corridor because if we didn't, we were supposed to get shot down. But we were coming in from the east one day, and we totally were lost in a sandstorm. And suddenly, just before it was getting dark, and see, if we had flown on or gone out over the Mediterranean Sea, we didn't even have life rafts on board. We had no water equipment. But just as it was getting to get dark, the clouds opened up, and right under us was the Sea of Galilee, that triangle. And I was a navigator. I said to the pilot, say, we were right over the Sea of Galilee. He said, how you know? I said, see that triangle? I said, I had that Bible atlas when I was in Bible school. He said, you're sure? I said, I'm positive. So he said, well, I'm going to take your word for it. So we changed course and headed down south. And about that time, the clouds began to break away over here, and we got challenged. We had flare guns. There's a gun mounted in a plane and had flares, all different color flares, and every 6 hours the colors changed. And we had this little thing that told us every 6 hours what the color was, and I had this box of flare. And if they challenged you from the ground, you're supposed to shoot the right flare for that 6 hour period, because you didn't, they're supposed to shoot you down. And I mean, from the time we got from here to here, I got challenged 3 times, and I just had 3 flares. I mean, I stuck that 3rd flare in the gun, and I shot it, and I said, boy, if we get challenged again, brother, we're sunk. But by that time, we had reached our corridor right here, and we didn't get challenged anymore. But now, it's interesting. God said that 3 countries would escape out of the hands. He said it was Moab, with Ammon. He said it was Ammon. And by the way, the country of Ammon is the country of Jordan today. In fact, the capital of Jordan is Amman. It's after Ammon. That's the name Ammon, and the capital of Jordan today, Amman, Jordan. And then the country of Moab was right along here. And was Edom then, wasn't it? Edom. Edom is all down in here. In other words, you put it in modern language, it says this: many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Jordan and Arabia. Now why? Why would God allow Jordan and Arabia to escape the hands of the beast? Well, all Bible scholars are convinced that God kept those countries so that Jews could flee across the river here and find safety over here in this wilderness. And that's the reason that God did not permit him to take Jordan and Arabia. Those 3 he couldn't take. And I personally feel that way myself, that that's the reason that God preserved those 3 countries and didn't let him take them, because that's the place where God preserved a place where Jews could flee to and not all be killed. All right, now let's go back to Revelation. And that's chapter 12, verse 6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there. So it would mean that the Arabians and the Jordanians would be given food, and these refugees would be keeping them alive for 3.5 years. That's 1,260 days. And then he tells something else here. It says, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Now here's the 3rd personage the archangel, the fourth one that we read here. Michael. Because remember, I just told you a while ago, the duty of Michael was to watch over God's people. And so at this point, Satan lost. Even though Satan had been cast out of heaven before the first chapter of Genesis, he and his angels had been chained in darkness to await the judgment. He himself still had access to God. You remember, that's what the book of Job is all about. There was the day when the sons of God presented themselves, that would be God's angel, presented himself before God, and Satan came with them. And Satan, up until this time, still has the power to go directly to God and accuse you. He still has that power, just like he did Job. And this is where he loses it, right here now. He will have that power until the middle of the tribulation week, and that's when he loses that. Verse 9. So the great dragon was cast out. And here is all three of his principal names used here, and they all mean something different. I have a long teaching on this. That serpent, called the devil and Satan. Those three names. And you young people are in here just for the fun, just right now a little off it. As the serpent, the word is office. You remember it was a serpent who came into the Garden of Eden and tempted Eve, and it said he was a very beautiful creature. You see snakes beautiful? Well, he had 4 legs at that time, because that was one of the curses on him after he tempted Eve, that God would remove his legs and he'd have to crawl in the dust on his belly all the rest of it. And to a snake today, if you want to pick up one, I pick them up all the time if I can find one. I had to pick up one the other day and get it out of the way while I was cutting some grass. I didn't want to hurt the poor thing. And put him over under the shelter so he wouldn't get hurt. And you feel under there, they just love you to rub their bellies. You get to rubbing up, they'll just turn over just like a dog, and they just love it. But you can feel 4 little places under there where there used to be 4 legs, and that's what these biologists tell us, that there was a time when, and of course they think it was due to evolution. But I think and they have 4 little places, you can feel 4 little bones, think where there used to be legs. But anyhow, he was a beautiful creature. Well, the word Satan, a serpent here, is office, and that's where we get our English words, an ophthalmologist, and optics and optometry. You see, well, what's that got to do with it? Because the word serpent here, the Greek word office, means one who winks with the eye, In other words, like the prostitute sitting on the street corner, young men coming along. The seducer. That's exactly what it means, the seducer. It means Satan as a seducer. And and all those other things. And the word devil and the word Satan, they all, in the Greek and the Hebrew, have their definite name. But let's go ahead and read this. Verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Lamb have come, because we've reached the place now where God's going to wind it up. Delay shall be no longer. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night. And if you want to get a picture of that, it's the first chapter of Job. It tells how he does it. Has been cast down. And that means the Christians of the ages, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And the word testimony here doesn't mean something you stand up in church and say. It means your daily life. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by getting genuinely saved, and then by a daily life as a Christian. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. He got only 3.5 years left. But at that point, here in the middle of the week, Satan finally forever loses that privilege of going before God and accusing the saints. And he comes down to earth, and he knows that in 3.5 years, Christ is going to suffer a millennial kingdom, and so he's going to do all the devilish he can in that 3.5 years. He's going to try to destroy every one of the Jews. And so God provides a place for them to escape, and I think that's the very reason, like I showed you on the map, that he would not let the beast take the two countries that we call Jordan and Arabia today. It'd be a place where they could escape across the Jordan and find it, and said they'll feed them then. These people feed them as refugees. Okay, you see, it's not all that hard to understand. Verse 13, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. That's just 3.5 years of terrible persecution. That's called the time of Jacob's trouble. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nursed. And here's the third thing. For a time, that's 1 year, times, that's 2 years, and half a time, half a year. 3.5 years again. First it said 42 months. Then it said 1,260 days. Now it says a time, times, and a half a time. 3 ways it said that from this point on there's going to be 3.5 more years of the tribulation period. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman. And that's what we read back in Zechariah, where it said he invaded Jerusalem. The women were just taken out and ravished by the soldiers. The houses were rifled. Half of the city was put into chains. That's just Jerusalem alone. Think of what he did to the rest of the country. And now he was so enraged at it. And then in chapter 13, and I don't think I want to start that tonight, because I'm going to give you, because you young people won't be with us next Wednesday night, but I'm going to give you 2 little ideas right here. And we're going to move on through the rest of the 7 personages. But in the end time, people only think of there's just one great evil person. But in chapter 13, we're going to see there are 2. Calls about a beast out of the earth. And I frankly think we see that about to happen now. And the beast out of the sea. Because in the end time, there are going to be 2 big beasts. One is going to be the political ruler. He's the one that's going to be in charge of the government and the armies. Then there's going to be a religious ruler who will be the ruler of the world church. In the end time, we're going to read about that world church who's going to be destroyed. In Revelation, there's some mighty interesting things it says about it back, I think, about over chapter 17 or something like that. And he's going to be over the world church just like the Pope is over the Catholic Church. I don't mean the Catholic Church will be it. I mean, I'm just using that as an illustration. So there'll be these 2 men, and the religious ruler will be working right with the political ruler. And it says the religious ruler will even call fire down out of heaven. It says he will do miracles, and he'll tell the people that the political ruler who's sitting in the temple at Jerusalem is God. And what do you think? You're sitting by your television, and on CNN News, here's this great political ruler. He may have vestments on like a priest does today. And when it says from heaven, it means he'll actually say it in the name of God. Or he stands on television and says, in God's name, I demand that fire fall from heaven, and great flames of fire will be coming down to the... Well, that had to be God's man. But he's going to tell people that God is this political ruler sitting in the temple of Jerusalem. But he said he's going to deceive the earth by the signs and the wonders and the miracles which he did. So don't think because you see a miracle it's from God. The devil can work miracles. But anyhow, here's the thing that shocks so many people when I bring it out. I'm going to bring it out next Wednesday night. I'm going to read it, but you folks won't be in here. It's not the government that makes people take the mark of the beast. It's the church.